Welcome to the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where we champion education, celebrate community, and unite the very best of humanity. Fueled by world-class military precision and cultural excellence, the Washington Tattoo produces unforgettable immersive experiences, creating an atmosphere for people, organizations, and businesses to connect, network, and build impactful relationships. We invite you to listen to this episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast, where the world's musical traditions come to life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Washington Tattoo Podcast. As usual, I have my good co-host, Stu Warmington. Stu, how are you today?
Great. It's all sunny here for once, so it's nice to be stuck indoors.
That's great. And on the other side here, we also have, without really needing any introduction, is the acclaimed Brigadier David Allfrey. And David, you've been a great friend and mentor, and honestly, it's been such a pleasure to learn from you and to get your experience, but you know, your background in military and then the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo and events in general. Just, it's such an honor to have you on today. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, huge pleasure to be with you, and great, particularly after this great weekend too. We've had a fabulous weekend with the Coronation and still in the midst of it. So it's lovely to be with you.
This is fantastic. And I think we definitely have to give, you know, maybe a 3 cheers, hip, hip, hooray for the King and the Queen now, which was a coronation yesterday and a beautiful event. And honestly, I think probably a highlight for many people's lives.
Oh, I mean, historic and wonderful on so many different levels. And both from a sort of national heritage point of view, just extraordinary, but also some of the little personal moments in it, and watching the King's face on the television when he was given 3 cheers, him and the Queen from the armed services. That was a very, very special moment, and I have to say that was right up there. All sorts of dewy eyes in the Allfrey household. It was fantastic.
Well, and I think it's a brilliant move, too, because, I mean, all of us on here, I mean, we have military backgrounds and we understand the work and dedication that it takes to have an event come across that well. And Stu, you were definitely behind the scenes with a lot of the drums and things of that nature. I mean, so what were some feelings that you had about the coronation yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. You know, these coronations don't come around very often. So one, we're lucky to experience. But, you know, for the British Drum Company, we were lucky enough to supply the drums for the Royal Marines with the new King cipher on, so that was something different as well. You know, so it's got different processes and, you know, changing badges up to because it's not just a case of sticking it in. It's all got to be centralised and make sure it works well with the rest of the design. And you know, it's completely different on bass drums. So that whole process was great, working with the Royal Marines, working closely, making sure that they were sending the right files across, and we were, you know, print the right files and attach them to the drum. So. No, it's a very proud day for not just myself, you know, as the marching division, but everybody in the factory, who pretty much everybody had something to do with them drums at some point during the process. So seeing them out on the coronation was fantastic.
That's super fantastic. I love it. And David, you were sharing that this past weekend you also were doing some events locally as well. So I mean, all across the UK, there were also kind of, you know, micro events that were all happening as well. So could you share just what some of those events are kind of like?
Well, I live in a lovely village in the middle of Wiltshire with modest broadband and all the right sort of shops, and it's absolutely glorious. We've had an enormous Union flag hanging down the front of the house for the last week, and the village is absolutely absorbed by it. All the local crocheting group has done crochets over all the pillar boxes and everything else, and most people were absorbed by the television coverage yesterday. BBC did just a fantastic job of covering that, and I think most people, we put the television on at 7:30 in the morning, and we turned it off at about 10:30, and we're sort of feeding a variety of people as they sort of came through the house. And then today we've had just really catching up with neighbours and friends locally on what everyone thought about it, meeting people on dog walks and so forth in the sunshine. And then this afternoon, we've had a great picnic on the sports field, which has just been stunning. And with sort of all the lovely things that you associate with a sort of village occasion. Really, really memorable and tremendous sense of unity and community. I mean, just really special, actually.
Wow. The national sense of pride has just got to be beaming in through the roof at the moment. Incredible. So, really to dive into some questions here, David, I mean, I've been obviously a huge fan of your work for many, many years, and you've become a really good friend and supporter of what we're doing with the Washington Tattoo. And so I'd love to just start kind of at your beginning and, your background and in the military, and a little bit just to get a little bit of a bite-sized story of your background and how you all first started in your profession.
Yeah, so I joined the army as a non-sort of graduate back in 1978, long time ago it seems now. I was commissioned into the Scots Dragoon Guards in 1979, and of course with that comes a phenomenal musical heritage. I'm not a musician, but I've got a reasonably good commercial ear, and I enjoy my music. I enjoy my music in all its genres, really. And regimentally, the pipes, and at that time, regimental band music, was every day our routine was set either by bugle calls or trumpet calls or pipe calls, whether it was commanding officer's orders or the start of parade in the morning and everything else. Our band, sadly, was disbanded many, many years ago, and that gave us regimentally an extraordinary capability to deliver combined music, so pipes and drums and a brass military band. So we had some very talented directors of music and very talented pipe majors at that time. And we got very used to quite sophisticated arrangements of music. So not just the straightforward military marches and so forth, but really sophisticated arrangements of those that enabled the musicians of all the disciplines to take part. And the regiment has been producing records for many, many years. So they play at dinner, obviously, and the pipes and drums are held in great reverence, as were the military band. So that's really been in my sort of blood all the way through, and just appreciating it. In the cavalry, you have, as a young officer, you're invited to run a variety of parties and demonstrations and all the rest of it. And our parties were particularly sophisticated and wonderful. And at the time, probably quite expensive. But I really cut my teeth on running events as a junior officer. And as you move up the sort of rank level, if you've got a sort of an aptitude and you enjoy those sorts of things, you get invited to run demonstrations, technical demonstrations, battle demonstrations, and so forth. So I've done lots and lots of those. And inevitably, if you get asked to do those, you then get invited to do civic military events. And I got very involved in the sort of D-Day celebrations in one year or another, and in the local communities. So it was all sort of building up, really. I didn't know I was going to end up at the Tattoo until, where are we now, sort of the year 2010, when I was invited to run for the job of chief executive and producer. And I was still in the army then, and I've had a lovely career, not particularly distinguished, but just great fun. Some wonderful people and things along the way, great experiences. And I ran for the appointment, and to my great astonishment, was offered the job and resigned the following morning. From my role in headquarters land, as it was then. I was the chief of staff for support command. And my general was not the slightest bit surprised that I resigned on that morning. And then he very kindly allowed me to leave quite quickly. So by April the following year, literally 3 months beyond, I was up in Edinburgh, taking over from Ewan Loudon. And I'd known Mel Jemison, of course, as a regimental officer for, tens of years. He's been my commanding officer, my second in command. He's been a great mentor and carer all the way sort of through, and has taught me a great deal over the years. So I took over from Ewan Loudon at the Tattoo in 2011. And I think learnt quickly how to become a businessman. Of course, as a military officer, you're not a businessman. You don't really understand balance sheets and profit and loss and all those sort of charming things. You think you're a leader. You come out able to lead in a military context, and you have a pretty good style book on leadership. You can go from quite sort of transactional stuff, telling people to get a move on, through to quite gentle mentoring and sort of arm around shoulder type stuff. I must admit I find it quite challenging going into a civilian company. My last command had been a brigade in Scotland, and when we turned right, sort of everybody turned right. Civilian companies don't sort of work like that. Some people go right, some go left, some don't bother to turn up. It's sort of very. So that was all quite humbling, really. I think there were only sort of 17 people in the tattoo when I arrived, and very well established it was then. So that was all quite a journey. And then learning the craft of events, although you understand the sequencing and so forth of events, understanding the real detail of the technical side of putting on something like a tattoo is quite a journey.
Yeah.
And you have to really apply yourself to the craft of being a producer director, whether that's light, whether that's sound, whether that's projections, whether that's managing an event with all the licensing that's involved, all the construction, enormously expensive construction and production costs generally, and then trying to sort of make a profit and sell your ticket price at a price that people can afford and feel that is good value for them. So it's been a gripping journey, and I've learned a lot during my time at the Tattoo. There's no doubt about that.
So David, obviously there's lots of tattoos all over the world, from Basel through to Inverness and all over the world. What sets the Edinburgh Tattoo apart from the others? Is it because of the amount of time it's been going, or is it the backdrop, or, in your opinion, what makes it the tattoo?
I think there's a number of ingredients to its success, and you're absolutely right. There's some wonderful tattoos around the world, and the genre is well known and well explored, and has been for many years. The tattoo in Edinburgh is blessed with an absolutely incomparable backdrop. There's little doubt about that. There's not so many people who can sort of call on a 400-year-old castle and everything involved. It has its own challenges, because there's not that many entrances, and it's quite constricted and difficult to work. You can't get in till 6:30 at night because the general public are in there, and it's a sporting place to run an event. But I think that backdrop's very important. I think the tattoos, I don't underestimate the BBC coverage of the tattoo. It's been absolutely brilliantly photographed and edited and broadcast by the BBC for many, many years. And the reach that great broadcast gets to is really special. Some people, it's become the sort of, what do they call it? An appointment to view, which is the absolute prize in television, where people stop what else they're doing and they actually turn up and say, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, they get the show at the same time every year, and that assures an audience that is multi-generational. So, and it was always a great prize if we got an overseas licensing for the BBC. That was always a huge prize for us. And so the real pleasure and privilege of looking after the tattoo, which is very much an institution. It's not a show; it's an institution. As a producer, you're a caretaker. You're not some wide boy. You're a caretaker, and I really felt the weight of that.
Yeah.
You'll get 4 generations in the audience on a given evening, and that is amazing. That.
Yeah.
And whilst people they'll come to it when they're quite young, when they come with their grandparents, they go into the sort of cool phase in life where we have other priorities and they don't always turn up, in the teens and so forth. But when they have their own families, they'll come back because it's got great memories. So I think that, and I think I also don't underestimate our relationships in business with the travel trade, and all those hundreds of thousands of people who are linked with tourism in Scotland. We were very generously described as an attack brand for Scotland by Visit Scotland. So our relationship with tourism and everything was very, very close, and tourism into Edinburgh and to Scotland more generally. So I don't underestimate that. Some incredible American, travel companies our relationship was really close. And, they'd always be talking to us about what was the show going to be doing next year and the year after. And their customers consistently used to enjoy coming and used to enjoy the customer service. So the tattoo family, I think, was the sort of, the third really big bit that makes it successful. It is a family and it feels like a family.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you haven't performed there myself a number of times. It's, when you get before the tattoo even starts, before the opening fanfare, Alistair, the narrator, goes around, is anybody here from Hong Kong? And you just, you hear them cheers. It might be one person, might be 2 people, but there's so many countries represented in that audience every night, and it's the same every night. It's not there's no cheer on one night compared to the other. Every night there's somebody from pretty much everywhere he says. It just goes to show, what a global brand it is. And
you're absolutely right, Stu. And I think at our high point, I think 46% of the audience was international.
Wow.
And that is, it's a most tremendous convening of folk, to share in each other's culture. And I say each other's because although the show is quintessentially Scottish, it's quintessentially British as well. But the actors that are coming in from all over the world, who are both military and folkloric, civil performers, artists and so forth, you're getting a real sense of those countries' culture and heritage. And I think that was very, very precious. A real sense of mutual respect, not only between the performers, but also between the performers and the audience. And it was really, I think, really heartwarming, actually, and really precious, really precious.
Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of families go, and like you said, once the younger generation are old and got their own families, they'll be taken there, and it's just like a continuous thing that, when we were young, we used to go to the Edinburgh Tattoo, and it just boils on and bubbles over, and, and that's your audience.
It does.
You don't realise that you're going to have the same audience. They're just slightly older in age, but they've been going for 30 or 40 years.
And that, of course, gives you a tremendous responsibility to deliver for them what they want. And, I was always learned in business, the first thing is your customer. I hate thinking of somebody in that sort of transactional way where they sort of pay money to go for a ticket, but your customer, your family, the people who come to your show, you've got to really understand acutely what they want and what they get from it. And I used to very much enjoy talking to members of the audience, both before they come into the show and afterwards on leaving, and really trying to get a sense of the bits that got them in the head and in the heart.
Yeah.
What were the bits that were really special? And then as a designer, you were trying to make sure that the show included those. It means you can't do flights of fancy. You've got to be quite conservative in all of this. You've got to be conservative in the way you present your lighting, your sound, your projection, your music in particular. What do your audience want? What are they looking forward to? And they do unquestionably look forward to particular pieces of music, and one was always under considerable pressure to include particular items of particularly Scottish music every single year. And we used to have sort of quite a discussion about, gosh, are we going to include Highland Cathedral again? Which was when there was always some other thing that you spent a lot of time and money and energy building up some new wonderful arrangement which you thought was much better. And of course the audience still wanted that moment that they associated with one of those great tunes, whether it was the British Grenadiers or, Highland Laddie or, all those tunes, all of which are deep in people's memory, they're deep in people's culture.
I mean, that must be quite hard because, Highland Cathedral is definitely a favourite with anybody all over the world. So, how do you decide when and when not to include it? Because, you come under pressure from people saying, well, they didn't play that. And
yeah. The answer is you've got to be very respectful of that expectation. I followed the rule that if I had something that I thought was better in that particular year, it was my duty to share that. There are occasions when the programme quite naturally desires a special tune like that. So, Amazing Grace Going Home for me was a very special Mark Knopfler's track, which I absolutely adore. And, still it's one of my sort of great, desert island tracks. All those lovely tunes that you have, you've got to balance it. You can't do the same thing every year, not least because your performers like to be challenged with new arrangements, new ways of doing it. So your arranger composers are really important people, and your conversations with them, I think, were so interesting and so fulfilling. And I've had one or two extraordinary arranger composers who worked with me, and I would say, I'd love to do this particular track. Can we look at how we might arrange that? And occasionally I've been told, yes, David, that's absolutely lovely. That's a super song, but it sort of doesn't go anywhere musically. And so it's been marvelous. I played it on my stereo this morning, gain setting 9, and it really, got me. Yes, David, but musically it's not that interesting. You're fine with it because it has a particular... And you'd have those discussions with your technical people. And you had to listen. You had to listen to them because so often they would be professionally correct. They would offer great advice. So although one's got sort of strong musical opinions, one's got strong creative opinions, I'm obsessed by colour and sound and touch and smell and all those other lovely senses that you put into a show. You've got to keep your lugs open to what the audience want, what your experts are telling you, and try and balance all of that out to get just a great program every year.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting you bring up this almost philosophical conversation, because you start to think about the performers that are on the field are some of your biggest brand ambassadors. If the performers have a fantastic time, or the performers are playing great music, you can feel it. If the arrangements are flat and the arrangements are not strong, or the music is not chosen wisely, you can hear it in the performance, which translates to the audience.
Absolutely. And what I find incredibly exciting, and I'm now bald and getting slightly thicker around the waist. I'm now past of 60, so I'm allowed to be a bit more sentimental. I think I remember very, very vividly one particular night I was talking with Stevie Small, who you'll know, and there was something about the music behind us that you could feel. We'd listened to every performance going through, and both of us were talking out of sight of the arena, right, under the stands. And there was something, both of us felt the hairs on the back of the neck go up. And God, what's that? Why is that 5% better than what it was before? And as we put our head round the entrance, the entire audience stood up in the middle of the track. Now, I have to say, that was just so special. Now, why did they stand up and choose that particular moment to stand up? It wasn't musically the pinnacle of the track. It wasn't some great interval. It wasn't a change between two scenes. It was just something in it which had been delivered by the whole story, whether it's sound, light, all those senses being applied to it. And I remember it just really well, and came back thinking, wow, God, if you could build a show where every single moment, and of course, you don't want every single moment, because there are then no highs and lows. So you've got to take people's mood through the show and try and generate different moods and feelings as you go through the 90 minutes.
I love it. I think that's so special that you bring that up, because professionally, if you find someone who's successful professionally, there's probably 2 to 3 moments in their whole career where everything clicked. Everything hit everything it was supposed to. You felt that feeling of mastery in that moment. And yes, it's preparation. It's all of the product that you're working on prior to execute a particular, delivery of either an event or a speech or something like that. And so I think any professional has a few moments that are so special. And when they feel it and they realize it and they have the hair stand up on the back of their neck, they want more of it. And there's always this recipe that is almost sometimes impossible to replicate, because sometimes you just can't replicate that feeling. And it's an audience that night. It's a particular mood, the lighting. Maybe somebody took that crescendo in a different volume that one night. But it's always small details that I think when you put levels of excellence and professionals together, that this magic starts to happen on a performance field. And you only get that when you do the preparation work prior to, and you have those conversations about the type of music, the specific bands that are there, the story that's there, the colors, that whole feeling. It's very hard to put that into a spreadsheet and say, here is how I explain this by the numbers. But if you're there in that moment, you feel it. And there are almost no words that you can put to it. It's just a feeling.
You're very right, because it's also, and I'm going to be controversial for a moment, it's an analog process, this. It's not digital. So if you have decided that you want to have, a particular sequence of special effects or lighting or projection or something going on that is absolutely timed to the music. The music changes every single night. Every single night. And if you're listening to it really carefully, as most conductors are, they will change it. They'll change it depending on whether they had a good day or not had a bad. Now, the click is fine. The click will keep everybody alive. But if you time everything digitally, it's like digital sound. It loses a sort of depth. And I was very keen, as part of my craft and learning, to run the show by the black dots on the score. Now, it's really, really difficult to do that. In fact, the more complicated the show becomes, the more difficult it is. And the temptation is to have it all on a time sequence so that everything sort of happens and you're timing how long a particular shell goes up in the fireworks and how long it takes. But the lovely thing I found was having systems that would pick out something really special. And you as a musician will know what I mean by an obligato. I was obsessed with a little thing that would go on in the orchestration. I would just absolutely love to hear a little piece of trumpet or a little piece of piano or a little piece of guitar that just gave it a highlight, rather like a painter puts the white in the eyes of a portrait. It was something like that. And that for me was complete magic. And I would judge the quality of the sound and the lighting by how that particular effect was delivered. If that obligato came out at exactly the right moment as the projection changed and somebody did something special on the field, I think that was just what a pleasure. What a pleasure.
But that's a brilliant concept, because when you think about that level of detail, that means maybe not everything is figured out, but you have most of the other big picture items already planned. They're already worked out for the most part, and you can put those mental calories into that detail. And that already right there means you've got a great team. You've now got the right arrangements. You've got great musicians there that can do it. And one small quick story. I remember student teaching in Plano East Senior High School in Texas. Fantastic marching band program, fantastic music program. And I was a young teacher conducting the wind ensemble. And we were doing, Granger Irish Tune. And I was learning how to do an entrance with my baton, whether it was going to be a more staccato entrance, a more legato entrance, a marcato entrance. And we were talking about tongue articulations on the flute, on the piccolo, on the tuba, and the type of articulation. Is it going to be a la, a da, a ta, and all of those things mechanically that would happen on within an embouchure with the tongue to have the articulation. And these kids that were 17, 18 years old, every time I would move my baton, either in a legato motion, a marcato motion, or a staccato motion, those kids executed on that level. And so what was mind-blowing to me was that if you are able to put in your process a way to get people to that level of excellence, these little tiny details, you can start to color in this show and these performances and get people's hair on the back of their necks to stand up because you've thought of, the white in the eye of a painter, or the obligatos, or, a glissando with a set of chimes or bells that you're thinking you want to add as a piece of color, where most people are still going, the buses aren't here yet. Hey, food is in a half an hour. That's that level of detail difference between, your productions and I think just where your mind is. And I think that's just so valuable.
I think it's a lovely thing. I mean, many people would sort of accuse me of being probably too detailed and too interested in those little things. But once you're sort of involved in a project and it is a passion, and something like running these tattoos, they sort of oughtn't really to work. They've got very large numbers of people. They're very expensive. They involve an awful lot of people agreeing to go in a single direction. And that's really tough. And it's not just about rehearsing them to go in one direction. It's really just encouraging everybody to take part in a unitary activity, which I think is really special if you can get it. And I used to get very emotional about the show because I knew that every single person who was on the show was absolutely endeavouring to give their very best. And there was nobody who was a passenger in it. And when you get to that point, you get just extraordinary performance. And watching people's faces, I used to try and get down the Royal Mile after the show to say thank you to the cast as they marched down the hill. The sense of, we've just done another amazing performance, to say thank you at the end of the evening, because you've got no way of communicating to 1,400 people. You can't say thank you for every single one, but you're trying to say a corporate thank you for all the creative energy, the professionalism, the preparation, all the shining of uniform, the brushing, and everybody looking amazing. And if you could get that all to come to the unitary activity, your audience could not help but be involved and go away again. Bloody hell, that was just epic. And if it's epic, if it exceeds expectations, people will go, do you know, that's one of the best things I've seen all year. And my God, I'm going to tell my friends about it. And I'm going to come back next year with 4 other people. And as soon as you get into that cycle where everybody's involved in that, your communication one-to-one to people who've been to the show is exponential. Yes, you're going to have to buy marketing and buy communications and all those other professional things that you must now do. But one-to-one, there's nothing better than a taxi driver coming, you know, talking to you and saying, I came to the show last year. It was amazing. I mean, that's just fantastic when that happens. You think, oh, well, all that work and sweat and misery was worth it.
Yeah. So I've actually got a little story from the 2011 Tattoo, which I believe was your first one, David. So myself and another bugler, we co-wrote the drum static for the Royal Marines display. And, you know, you were on about these little special bits that you put in, and this whole drum display was built on the very end, the very last phrase where we did a stick ripple, we put a rallentando in, which never been done before, so this ripple eventually slowed down and everybody had to be working together. But initially, the shape was a hollow square. But at some point, we had to get into a straight line. And we just did like a little cadence to get in that straight line. And it was literally nothing. We didn't even think twice about it. But on that first night, when we moved into that straight line, the audience went absolutely mental. Like, the crowd went mad. And we just thought, you know, it's the first night, it's friends and family. And
no, it wasn't. It would be the appreciation of that complexity. Absolutely.
Every night that happened. And we just thought, you know, this little thing, we didn't even think about it. We just thought we're getting into a straight line to build up for the big one, you know, and this is, you know, it's these little magic moments that you don't even know are going to appear, but that raised everybody's morale for the entire time.
Yeah, you're so right, and you can sort of feel it. I used to watch what we used to call the unveil. We joined up the mass bands with the mass pipes and drums every night. The pipes and drums used to enter. I don't know whether they still do it. They used to come out of the dark, and at the strike of the pipes, we'd turn all the lights up. And the pipes and drums would be sort of there, and you could hear the whole audience go, I mean, just wonderful, as you say, having something really, really simple that just catches people a bit unawares, and they, you know, my God, and it has to be right. Everybody's got to be obsessing about that moment, and is it coming right? And that's what makes Tattoo so special, because they're so big. There's so many people trying to go in that one direction. A rock band, you might have 10, 12 folk, you know, all playing anything, but 1,400, anything up to 600 or 800 who might be musicians.
Yeah.
What a thing. And musicians have all got, you know, huge egos, haven't you? You've all got enormous egos. And, you know.
You try to...
It's funny you touch on bringing the pipes and drums in, because, you know, just earlier on we were talking about, you know, trying to please the audience using the same music. And normally you'd use something like 79 Farewell to Gibraltar, but that year it was the How to Train Your Dragon, you know, and that was completely different, and that went down really well. And then, you know how popular that tune's been, because in later years, other acts are using it within their display, and this is now a regular tune that everybody likes, you know, whether it's, you know, the New Zealand Army Band or whether it's the Lochiel Dancers, they're all now using it in there. So it just goes to show that, you know, a change from something that's been steeped in history for all these years, a quick change, and then now history.
We heard it yesterday. We heard the pipe tune, which I hadn't heard before, Charles III. The pipe tune played by the pipes and drums before His Majesty came out to see his armed forces, and I was really seized by that. I hadn't heard that track before, and I'm sort of now scratching about to discover who wrote it, where it came from, what's its story. Oh God, no! Well, you can get a sense of our energies of these things. Isn't that great through the screen? Love it.
What's incredible. So, David, you've seen groups from all around the world. Are there a couple highlight groups that really stick out to you that have been some of your favorite to either work with or just to listen to?
Yeah, it's a question funnily enough, I've been asked a lot, and do you know, I can't say that a particular group is my favourite. I genuinely can't do that, because I found over the nearly 10 years that I ran it that everybody was capable of producing something special, something that sometimes quite modest. And so my bits of the show used to be a little bit of each act. And it didn't matter how modest some part was being played, that had something special. And I love, for instance, some of the drum pieces. Washington is all about drums. Your background, Stu's background, you're drummers. Drummers is a universal language. And drumming, I'm not a drummer, I can't hold a beat, for instance. But when that sort of really works, that's really special. When any of the great drummers in the world work. I was very privileged to be part of bringing the Southwest Pacific Island nations together in Sydney for our great stadium show there. And we got an awful lot of very disparate islanders to come together and play in a single percussion track, which had been specially written. And that was incredibly special because we got all that anthropology coming into their collective instruments. And I don't think anyone's really tried to do that before or since. I mean, perhaps they might have done, but that was incredibly special. I love listening to a Mongolian throat singer. I absolutely adored listening to a particular American voice. We had, there's all sorts of things that are in there. And you were looking for those little special things rather than a particular act. And you're right, some acts did take an awful lot of energy to bring to the show, whether it was bureaucratic hurdles or people not agreeing that it was a sort of good idea. And I've got some, appalling stories of how difficult some of that was. But getting them all together, and they come off the aeroplane and say, right, this is what we're going to play. And you look at it and go, oh, God, really? I don't think that's going to work at all. And then you have to sort of go to the contingent commander and say, look, I know that a huge amount of work's gone into this, but actually we need to adapt this. This is just absolutely not going to work in the way you want it. May I suggest we do A, B, and C? And then having that tremendously grown-up discussion with him or her, and then they were going to have to go back to their contingent and say, the brute has now asked us to change this. The last 3 months have been to nothing. So there we go. Extraordinary, actually. And I think all of them are very special. And I've still got an address book full of wonderful people around the world who, will call from time to time. And that goes back to this tattoo family thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very, very special. And of course, our own bands, which, we're very proud of, just like the great American bands, we're very proud of those. And I love watching my own regiment on parade. That's always, it's always pretty special.
So, David, you just touching base on that, you've mentioned obviously some of these great bands and performances you brought across. Is there any that you wanted to bring across, but it never materialised?
Yeah, I was the 75th anniversary show was going to be very, very special. It was going to be my last show in 2020. And of course, COVID drove a coach and horses through that. And I'd got all sorts of plans to bring groups together. And in particular, I was very excited about bringing Zambia to the show. We'd talked at great length about celebrating their great river, the Zambezi. And I'd got a super act in embryonic form when we closed the show about all the peoples that lived down the banks of the Zambezi, of how it bubbled out of the ground in northern Zambia and then eventually goes over the falls. And that was all going to tie up with a great sea of platinum pouring out of the castle. You could just imagine all the sort of silliness that was going to go into that. And I was obsessed by it, and I had a lovely time in Zambia talking to their military and to their folkloric performers. And I would love to have delivered that 75th anniversary. It was a huge disappointment when we had to turn it off because of COVID, because the moment was lost. All the pre-work and the creative frame that had gone into that show was lost. And that was a real shame. So I'd love to have seen that. I mean, we were excited by that show. Whole thing went in the dustbin in one day. Awful.
So there's a lot of organisation goes into the Edinburgh Tattoo, as you know. But how does that compare to when you move it abroad to like New Zealand or Australia? How much more difficult?
So it's when you're doing it in Edinburgh, the whole thing is a known quantity. You know exactly how many people you can fit into a given space. It's a very well-oiled piece, and every single year we go through a rather tedious but important process of lessons learned, where we absolutely boil everything that's happened, and we draw out even minute timing changes that will make it work better, or process changes. So in Edinburgh, it's all it's all pretty predictable. When you go abroad, you are dealing with a very different venue, and that's, you're having to construct a castle if you're taking on a stadium. So that's got a sort of level of complexity and cost, which is quite exciting. But also you're dealing with different partners. And all of those partners will have different expectations, different ways of doing things. Their local technical experts will be very different to the ones you know and love. And so there's a very considerable leadership and managerial challenge in going abroad. It doesn't detract from it at all, but it makes it more challenging as the leader, certainly, to try and bring all those new people onto your single sense of unified purpose. And many of them will be very, very experienced professionals who are very used to doing it in a particular way. And I think sometimes find it unsettling, the sort of intimacy with which you had developed with your act. You would go up to a particular drum major and say, actually that didn't work terribly well, we're going to do it this way. And that no more would need to be said.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't conducted like a ceremony, or the rehearsals weren't like so that was quite challenging. But when you go abroad, if you're sort of brave enough and you're allowed to go to a stadium, the scale of stadium shows is just enormous. And I remember vividly going to the Westpac Stadium in Wellington, the Cape Tin, which is a lovely, lovely stadium anyway, and we were partnering with the Wellington Festival. And we decided we were going to play Pavako Koreana, the lovely, lovely Kiwi Maori tune, which everybody learns in primary school. So the entire nation knows this track, and it's just epic. And we had an awful lot of Maori on parade. I mean, a battalion, and I can quite see why we had to have a treaty when we were, fighting with the Maori. They really were A, very big, and B, very frightening. Enormous amount of bone involved. Just tremendous people. Anyway, we started the opening part of this track, and there was a sort of burr going on in the audio, and I couldn't work out what it was. I turned to the sound guy and said, "Have we got something weird happening? Is this, are the mics running? What is it? What's this burr?" And he just looked and he said, "No, it's the audience." And the whole audience were humming this track under their breath.
Wow.
Which is just amazing when you get a stadium full of people doing that. And they weren't singing it, they were just murmuring it to themselves. But when you add it up, however many people that was, it produced this incredible soundscape, on top of which the performers and the Maori soloists and everybody else were going to play. So I think going abroad is always more exciting. It's never quite Edinburgh, but it also does something, the chance of doing something huge and different is and it's really good for performers too. Performers love going abroad. It never runs quite as smoothly as it does at home. And I always used to say to performers, prepared to be mucked about.
Mm-hmm.
There is going to be, you're going to be mucked around whilst this is happening, because it will not run like clockwork. We'll do our absolute best, but prepared to be mucked about and enjoy it. Celebrate being mucked around.
So, just touching on that quickly, because this is something I want to know myself. Has there ever been a time where the Edinburgh Tattoo, or when it's been abroad, where it's gone pretty horribly wrong and not to plan?
Yeah. There have been. I'm not going to share them with you, but I have. It wasn't in Edinburgh actually, but we've had some pretty challenging moments abroad where bits of the design just didn't work, and you knew they hadn't worked.
Yeah.
And you watch a rehearsal and you realise the enormity of it not working.
Right. Okay.
You'd be within 48 hours of an opening night, and if something wasn't right, it was eye-wateringly not right.
Yeah.
And you'd have to solve it. And I'm not going to share what those moments were, but they are absolutely heart-stopping.
I can imagine.
Because you really do need to step up as the leader. You absolutely need to step up. And I've always said it's easy. Management is about taking people to the pub. You can sort of go and it's all sunny and everyone's going to go to a drink and sandwiches, it's all marvellous. Leadership is when, the temperature's dropping, you're eating the horses and the partisans are attacking you. And you sort of know those moments from military life where it's going completely pear-shaped and you cannot be overcome by the circumstances. You have to bloody well deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's really tough sometimes, and people sometimes get a bit wounded by that because you have to be pretty transactional in your leadership when that happens. Thankfully quite rare. Fun things like I remember a rifle being dropped once by the King's Guard or somebody from the Norwegian King's Guard. Very rarely a rifle was dropped, and of course the great thing is leave it there until there's a gap. Everyone walks over it and marches over it and just leave the damn thing there until there's a sort of safe moment. One of our team decided they wanted to recover this thing, and we watched him run across the esplanade to pick up this rifle. And I was mentally, from the production level, calculating his rate of travel and the angle of attack with the returning King's Guard and this rifle. And as you know, on a ship, the bearing wasn't changing. And and they went absolutely smack straight over the top of him, literally to roars of applause from the production level, because he should have left it wretchedly alone. But it was, those things are rare because people are really good at adapting. If something unspeakable is happening, people really do come up to the mark. And I know in over the years that there are lots and lots of midnight and small hours work that have gone into solving a problem. You can't contract for somebody to sit there at 3 o'clock in the morning and sort lights. You can't contract for that.
No.
It just requires a human being to say, I want to get this right, and knowing that they've got to hit those marks. Yeah.
Incredible. So I would ask this: if you would give advice to a aspiring tattoo, what are some things that you would share that would be kind of maybe high level, maybe some details? What are things that you would advise and say, hey, if I would do this all over again, I had to start from scratch? What are some thoughts that you have?
I think let me deal with the institution first. I think the new endeavour has got to really understand its audience. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the business, imperative of know your customer, know your product, know your customer, know what you're setting out, know what the proposition is. I think you have to really, really, really understand that, and there's no substitute for getting around the park and talking to people and doing the research and doing all the rest of it. I think that's really, really important. I think your numbers are very, very important, and although as a creative director or producer, you're obsessed with wonderful lights and colours and, pretty uniforms and all the other things. But if the finance does not work, it's all for naught. So you need to be pretty much on top of your numbers. And you need, I think, at least I do, because I don't have a brain that finds it easy to look at spreadsheets and so forth. You need somebody close by who is absolutely left brain dominant, who just understands the horrible detail of those budgets, and you've got to listen to them. You can play fast and loose, you can be adaptive, you can be flexible, you can make decisions about changing resources and priorities and all that sort of blah. But you've got to have somebody who really, really does the maths, because there's real truths in the maths. And tattoos as a business model shouldn't work. You put 1,400 people, you have to feed and accommodate and transport them. That's why, one-man comedian shows are so thoroughly successful. You put one bloke and a few lights, away you go. That builds houses and gives people yachts. Tattoos don't. And sometimes the margins for success can be quite narrow. Every ticket is a special thing. You've gone to great effort to sell a ticket. And I never took that for granted. I used to lie awake reflecting on the number of tickets that had been sold and what the break-even point was. Years, although the tattoo has been very successful, there were years when it was, tough going, but to work very hard to reach markets and reach new markets in order to make sure that those things happen. So I think that you've got to have a great team. Third point, I think, is absolutely and special. The team has to be special. it's not just about hiring professionals. The world is covered in professional people who you can contract, but you need special people to do something like a tattoo, because it sort of goes outside the sort of bounds of so many activities. And I think you have to understand your values. I think the whole business of authenticity, of what is it lies at the heart of your organisation, what's really important, what is your vision, what are your values, what are your standards. And I think the final thing is, depending on the role that you or anyone else is taking in Washington, if you're going to be a chief executive and a producer and a creative director, whether those three roles are split or whether they're one, those three people really have to know their craft. And I think, I learned along the way, and there were many, many things which I didn't and still don't know about. The physics of sound, the light levels required for television versus live. How did sound behave in strange amphitheatres? And then how does each instrument play out? All of this stuff, if you've been in this for your life, you sort of know instinctively. And then crazily, there's the sort of technical side. I think we put 80 tons of lighting in the roof of the Westpac in order to get the right light levels on the floor of a sports stadium. And a sports stadium is great. You put floodlights on, boom, and you know exactly you're going to get, 400 or 500 lux, or whatever the level is, straight on the field. But if you're doing that with theatre lighting, you need, and would the roof of the stadium take 80 tons, and would it take it in one bit or two bits? That again is a riveting discussion with experts. And could we afford to put 80 tons of stuff in the roof? Riveting, actually. So I think that whole thing, ultimately, tattoos come down to people and the extraordinary output of human beings, which is remarkable. And I think every day I was at tattoo, I was, get that feeling that you get in the armed forces so often, this absolute pleasure of dealing with just cracking people. The challenge of dealing with awkward ones, of course, because that's part of life. But really, really special people coming together. And I think that's the thing that has really been left with me. And so I guess that's about relationships. It's about forming relationships with one-to-one, one to groups, one to partners, and all this, one to governments, because tattoos inevitably have got to go to governments to seek their support for their acts, for their armed forces, for their support, for their patronage. But Washington's doing a cracking job on this, I have to tell you. You're doing really famously well on this. You're building from a sort of, from an absolute, zero baseline, apart from the sort of professional experience you've all had. But you've built a wonderful community of support, growing every day. And I think there's so much to offer from what you're doing, and offering both Washington itself, the United States, but much more widely the sort of this business of cultural exchange, of people knowing each other better. And if you know each other better, you get on better. It's more difficult to get cross with people that you know.
Right.
And so much of our world has got frictions and difficulties, and it mainly comes down to cultural difference. The squabble for resources and all of those things. If people were sympathetic to the other, or even understanding, not necessarily sympathetic, of the other position. I'm not now being sort of misty-eyed and looking for a nirvana, but I do think that tattoos are an important part of our cultural landscape. They're certainly part of defence diplomacy. They're certainly a showcase for our nations and what we think is important. And I think, tattoos do, I think, I'm so conscious that with social media and so much happening, life has become very, very complicated. And, watching yesterday, the crowning of a king in this country with all those centuries of history, that for many, many, many people is a banister rail. It's a sort of, actually, we're still okay. This is fine. And, politics will go up and down, and economics will go up and down, and socials will go up and down, and all those things. But actually, this is still where we are as a country. I sort of buy the fact that some people, don't take the same view. But I think tattoos are part of that story. in the same way as a national orchestra, or a national dance company, or these wonderful trade missions and our foreign diplomats and so forth. This is all part of the texture of what we are as countries, what our values are, and I think tattoos are an important part of that. I think there's a lot to be gained from them.
I think you touched on it earlier on about having a tattoo family, and it's me and Mark met in 2010 in Sydney, and obviously that relationship is expanded, but it's the same. I still keep in contact with people from the King's Guard who they only do a 2-year conscription, and they've left 10 years ago, but I still keep in touch with them, and it's you do have a tattoo family, and you will go to different tattoos, and you'll meet up with people, and it is that family. Then everybody, that's the one thing that everybody likes, is this tattoo atmosphere you get, whether you're in the Cath bar of a night, or whether it's in rehearsals, or when you're having food, or it's that people you just bond with, and it's only the people on that tattoo understand what you're going through, and touching on the emotion, like you said earlier on, when you're on the finale and the music's just right, you remember these emotions, and they'll go back to their whatever country they've come from, and they'll remember that as well. You've got that time together that other people.
I think it does, and I think, funnily enough, you asked me for sort of some of my great memories. I'm a bad painter. If you knew me, I'm a sort of learning to be an oil painter, and I'm passionate about learning it, and I'm really enjoying it. My first exhibition is actually running now. I'm not suggesting you buy any of my paintings, but it's really nice to have pictures on display. And I have one amazing romantic picture that I remember. It's fleeting, so fast you couldn't have caught it on camera. Of I think a Scots Guards drummer under the stands, and one of the dancers was just about to go on for the dance set, and they clearly struck a relationship, and there was just a fraction moment in the half light underneath the thing where she looked up at him, gave him a peck on the cheek, and she then went off to her place. It was one of those just magical romantic moments, and if you take all the sort of cynicism out of the world, it was just utterly beautiful. She was looking fantastic. He was looking incredible. They were beautifully lit. The whole thing was just fabulous. And if I was to do a portrait of the tattoo, it would probably be of that moment, I think.
Wow.
Amazing. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. What are some things that you're doing now? What in retirement? What's keeping you active? So you're painting, you're advising.
I've had a few months. I've had both my knees replaced in the last 6 months, so I'm now entirely plastic and metal and composite from the bottom of my femurs through to the top of my tibias, which is very exciting. I'm looking forward to learning to walk properly again without looking like a pirate all the time. That's great. I've got a number of projects on the go, both at home and abroad. People have been very charming and rung up and asked for help. And the nice thing about being a sort of individual now is I can pick and choose and be helpful where I think it's genuinely valuable. I've got much more time with the family, which has been stunning. I've had most of my military life and my tattoo life. I haven't had time really to meet my children or my wife. I am actually married and I've got 2 children. It's a bit of a revelation during COVID. And my painting's coming on, and I love chasing trout. I'm a fly fisherman, and that's my great passion. But enough projects to keep my brain, and I lecture and audit on soft power. I'm very, very interested in how countries present themselves and their values. I'm very, very interested still in that. And I think the experience of being both in the military and now looking after things culturally, I think is important. And I'm enjoying doing that.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Stu. It's always a pleasure, my friend. And if you enjoy this episode, check out the website, www.thewashingtontattoo.com. We're on all the social media channels. Please please subscribe. We'll have more great information and content coming out like this. And Brigadier David Allfrey, thank you so much for your time, and it is an honor to call you friend.
It's been famous, Mark, and Stu, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be involved with you. I think you're wonderful, and I think your organisation is reaching for the stars. I'm so thrilled, and yes, lovely. I should see you in Washington one day. I'd love to do that.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
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 Hey everyone, this is Mark Riley again. We want to share a great opportunity with you to get your business name out to our listeners. We are looking for individual episode and yearly sponsors for the Washington Tattoo podcast. So if you love music, history, and want to support military veterans, please take this step with us and consider being a sponsor. For information on that, please email marketing@thewashingtontattoo.com.